People often imagine betrayal arriving like a thunderstorm, loud, violent, impossible to ignore. But in my life, it showed up quietly, almost politely, slipping into the rhythm of ordinary days until everything familiar began to feel slightly misaligned. Nothing obvious at first. Just subtle shifts that didn't deserve alarm on their own, but together formed a pattern I was too slow to acknowledge. For weeks, Clara moved through our home with an anxious energy she tried to disguise beneath explanations about work pressure, looming deadlines, and the exhaustion that came with tax season. She spent more evenings at the office, more weekends catching up, more mornings complaining about migraines or nausea. Whenever I offered help, she insisted she only needed rest, nothing more. I didn't question her. After nearly 20 years of marriage, I assumed I knew her better than anyone. Our daughter, Mia, filled the rest of the house with her own storm of emotions. At 20, she stood at that fragile intersection between adulthood and adolescence, wavering between confidence and uncertainty. She was clever, opinionated, and far more independent than I had ever been at her age. And she had a boyfriend, Evan. A polite young man who presented himself with a calm earnestness that made it easy to trust him. He was the type of kid who offered to help carry groceries without being asked, who remembered birthdays, who always looked me in the eye when we spoke. Clara seemed unusually warm toward him, but I dismissed it as her desire to keep Mia's relationship stable. She laughed at his jokes, asked thoughtful questions about his university classes, and often soothed the tension whenever he and Mia clashed over something trivial. Looking back, the signs were sitting right in front of me, practically begging for attention. But I wasn't ready to see them. Or maybe I simply didn't want to. One evening, as Clara reached into her purse for painkillers, a small appointment card slipped out and fluttered to the floor. I bent down to retrieve it without a second thought, expecting it to be a routine medical note, maybe her dentist or an eye checkup she had forgotten to mention. Instead, the logo of a prenatal clinic stared back at me. For a moment, I couldn't make sense of the words. They felt misplaced, like they belonged to someone else entirely. Clara hadn't mentioned anything even remotely connected to pregnancy. We had agreed years earlier that our family was complete. Our lives weren't built around the idea of starting again. And if she had entertained a change of heart, she would have confided in me, at least, that's what I believed. I heard her footsteps returning before I could process the shock. She noticed the card in my hand, and for a fleeting moment, her expression exposed everything: guilt, fear, and a desperate scramble to regain control. She reached for the card almost too quickly, as though the sight of it near me set off every alarm in her body. She whispered that she intended to tell me soon, but the fragility in her voice carried a truth she wasn't saying aloud. I felt a tremor of panic rise through my chest as I asked the question that had already formed in my mind, though I wished it hadn't. I asked whether the pregnancy could be mine. Her reaction wasn't confusion. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't even surprise. She simply lowered herself onto the edge of the bed and covered her face with trembling hands. The silence stretched so long that the room seemed to shrink around us. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were full, her breathing unsteady, and she looked like someone cornered by consequences she had hoped might stay hidden a little longer. She couldn't bring herself to say it was mine. She couldn't bring herself to say anything at all. I felt the temperature in the room drop as understanding settled in, the kind of understanding that erodes trust in seconds. When I finally asked who the father was, she hesitated again, telling me she wasn't ready to reveal that yet. The moment those words left her lips, something in me broke in a slow, deliberate way, as if my heart had decided to tear itself apart gently rather than all at once. I walked out of the room with the numbness of someone who had been hit but hadn't yet registered the pain. I spent the night in the guest room, lying awake, sifting through every detail of our lives, searching for signs I should have noticed earlier. Everything looked different in hindsight, like a film where the twist becomes obvious only after you already know the ending. The next day, Mia arrived home earlier than expected with her eyes red and her hands trembling. She muttered something about a fight with Evan, though she refused to share details. She asked me not to intervene, insisting that she and Evan needed to figure things out privately. Her distress struck me as odd because Evan didn't respond to her calls or messages for the rest of the evening. His absence felt strange. Not like a boyfriend giving space, but like someone who feared that any communication would cause a disaster he was trying desperately to outrun. Throughout that week, I became hyper-aware of everything around me. Clara avoided my eyes, kept her phone closer than usual, and restricted her conversations to the bare minimum. Mia swung between anger and heartbreak without understanding the real reason for Evan's sudden withdrawal. And Evan himself seemed to vanish entirely from our orbit, retreating into excuses about being busy, though the truth was something far more sinister. The final thread snapped when I walked through the kitchen and Clara's phone lit up with a notification. A message from Evan appeared on the screen, carrying the kind of urgency that only comes from a shared secret on the verge of exposure. Evan, we can't keep hiding this. It isn't right, and we need to tell him before things get worse. Everything inside me shifted. The floor felt unstable beneath my feet, as if the entire world had tilted without warning. In a single moment, the truth rose like a tide I couldn't hold back. My wife wasn't carrying a child conceived through a fleeting mistake with some stranger. She was pregnant with the child of the young man dating our daughter. The betrayal wasn't only marital. It was familial. It was generational. It was catastrophic. And once the shock settled, something colder, sharper, and far more calculated began forming inside me. I wasn't going to beg for explanations. I wasn't going to crumble under their guilt. I was going to make every one of them face consequences they never imagined. The morning after I saw that message, the house carried a tension that clung to the air like static. Nobody spoke. Nobody made eye contact. Even the floorboards seemed to creak more cautiously, as though they had learned something terrible and didn't want to disturb it. Clara stayed in the bedroom longer than usual, stepping out only after she had revised her face into a version she hoped might pass for calm. She brewed coffee with mechanical movements, her hands trembling so slightly someone less observant might have missed it. But I saw everything now. I saw the way her shoulders tightened when her phone buzzed. I saw how she deliberately positioned herself with her back to me. I saw how desperately she tried to act like nothing had changed, even though everything had. I didn't confront her right away. Some people believe confrontation gives closure, but sometimes silence reveals far more. I watched her move around the kitchen with the kind of guilt that radiates from every gesture. She avoided the topic of the clinic, avoided mentioning the baby, avoided the question she knew would eventually come again: who is the father? I waited. Not because I needed her honesty, but because I wanted her to reveal the entire truth with her own hesitation, her own fear, her own unraveling. Later that afternoon, Mia returned home from campus, exhausted and distressed. She had not slept, and her pale face carried the weight of something bigger than a simple argument. She sat on the sofa with her knees tucked close, head lowered, scrolling through her phone with trembling hands. "She's been texting him nonstop," Clara murmured behind me, trying to sound concerned, though the slight quiver in her voice betrayed something entirely different. She wasn't worried about Mia's heartbreak. She was worried about Evan's silence. I walked into the living room and sat across from my daughter. "Has he contacted you at all?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "Not since 2 days ago. I don't understand what happened. One moment things felt normal, and the next he stopped responding altogether. I've been calling, messaging, everything." Her voice cracked. She covered her face with her hands. I felt her pain, but beneath it simmered something darker, heavier, more dangerous. Having to watch my daughter suffer because of a boy who not only betrayed her but violated the most sacred boundaries of our family ignited a fury I had never experienced. It wasn't just paternal protectiveness. It was something primal. I placed a hand on her shoulder and told her she deserved honesty, that she deserved someone who didn't disappear without explanation. But the words felt heavy in my mouth because I already knew why Evan had vanished. He wasn't confused about the relationship. He wasn't overwhelmed by university stress. He wasn't taking a break. He was hiding. And he was hiding because the secret he shared with Clara was about to devour him. That evening, Clara stood by the dining table, turning her phone face down each time it lit up. She didn't realize I could see the reflection of her screen in the window. Her messages with Evan flashed like confessions written in digital ink. "We need to talk before he finds out. I can't face her. My parents will never forgive me if they learn the truth. I can't pretend this didn't happen." Each message stripped away whatever remained of my marriage. Not violently, but with a slow, methodical cruelty that made every careless choice they had made echo louder. Later that night, Clara finally approached me. She stood in the doorway, twisting her fingers together, gathering courage she assumed might shield her from the storm she expected. She asked if we could talk in private. Her voice was low and fragile, as though she already sensed that the conversation would not end with forgiveness. I followed her to the bedroom, not because I wanted comfort or clarity, but because I needed her to finally speak the truth aloud. She sat on the edge of the bed, inhaling deeply before she began. "I need to explain something before it gets completely out of control," she said, forcing each word through a tight throat. "I made a mistake. A terrible one. And I'm not proud of anything that happened." Her eyes flickered toward the floor, unable to meet mine with any measure of sincerity. She wanted sympathy. She wanted understanding. She wanted a gentler reaction than she deserved. "You've already seen the appointment card," she continued. "I should have told you earlier, but I didn't know how. I hoped I could gather the courage before everything spiraled. I didn't want you to find out like this." I listened in silence. She mistook my quiet for restraint, not strategy. I wasn't looking for someone, she said softly. It just happened. We were talking more often because of Mia, and one evening I offered to drive him home after a late study session. We started talking about life, about feeling unappreciated, about moments we wished we could change. I didn't realize how close we were getting until the line was already crossed. She paused, waiting for me to jump in, to interrupt, to lessen the weight of her confession. I didn't. With each second of quiet, she seemed to shrink. It wasn't supposed to become anything serious, she whispered. And it didn't. But one night, things got out of hand. I wasn't thinking clearly. He wasn't either. It was just one night? One night? I finally spoke, my voice steady but edged with something she could no longer ignore. You destroyed our family over one night? Her expression collapsed, as if she hadn't expected the coldness of my tone. She attempted to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. Tell me the name, I said. Say it. Say who the father is. Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes. You already know, she whispered. Evan. The sound of his name spoken aloud made the betrayal feel alive, like something crawling beneath my skin. She tried to add that she regretted everything, that she never meant to hurt anyone, that she wished she could turn back time, but each excuse felt irrelevant. Her apology was meaningless compared to the damage she had inflicted. My marriage had not simply fractured, it had been contaminated by something far more poisonous than infidelity. When she finally fell silent, I realized she had no idea what her confession had awakened inside me. She imagined I would simply confront Evan, shout at him, throw him out of our lives, maybe even break down in grief. But I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was planning consequences. Slow ones. Precise ones. Unforgettable ones. Because Clara hadn't betrayed only me. She had betrayed our daughter. Our family. Our home. Everything we built. And whatever came next would reshape all of our lives, especially hers. The day after Clara admitted everything, something inside the house shifted in a way that felt almost physical. It wasn't only the tension between us, it was the way the walls seemed to echo differently, as if they had chosen a side. The silence no longer felt neutral. It carried a weight, a pressure, a warning. Clara walked around the house as though she were stepping through shards of glass, afraid that any wrong movement might slice her open again. She avoided Mia entirely, terrified of the moment when the truth would reach her daughter's ears. She avoided me as well, primarily because she no longer understood the version of me standing in front of her. She expected anger, accusations, arguments, or emotional collapse. Instead, she found someone composed, measured, intentional. She mistook my calm for acceptance. She didn't realize she had created a man who no longer needed explanations. I didn't shout because shouting gives the other person power. I didn't curse because cursing gives them somewhere to hide. I didn't break anything because breaking things wastes energy that could be used more productively. While Clara kept walking through the house with her shoulders hunched in guilt, I started constructing something far more methodical, my plan. But before anything, I needed information. That morning, Mia approached me with her usual honesty etched across her face. Dad, have you heard from Evan? Because I still haven't. And I'm starting to feel like I did something wrong. Her voice trembled, not from anger but from heartbreak. Watching her suffer felt like a knife twisting beneath my ribs, but it also solidified my resolve. She deserved truth. She deserved justice. She deserved a father who would not let anyone, especially her own mother, shatter her trust in the world without consequences. I told her that Evan's silence wasn't her fault, that sometimes people hide because of problems they created, not because of anything she did. The words confused her, but I wasn't ready to give away the truth yet. I wanted to control the moment she learned it, and more importantly, I wanted Evan in the room when she heard it. He would not escape the impact of his choices by hiding behind disappearing messages and frantic excuses. Clara overheard the conversation and flinched, but she still said nothing. Her guilt had consumed her ability to function, yet she remained terrified of admitting the truth to her own daughter. Every time Mia cried, Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she never stepped forward to comfort her because she knew compassion would inevitably collapse into confession. Later that evening, I went into my office, closed the door, and pulled together everything I knew about Evan: phone number, university schedule, part-time workplace, even the addresses he had mentioned in passing during casual conversations at dinner. People reveal far more than they realize when they believe they're in safe company. I started with the simplest step, contacting him. I didn't call because hearing my voice might have given him an opportunity to prepare. Instead, I sent a message, short, controlled, impossible to misinterpret. We need to talk today. In person. You choose the location. He didn't respond immediately, which didn't surprise me. Fear has a way of slowing a person's reaction. But hours later, near midnight, he finally answered. I don't think it's a good idea. His avoidance strengthened my determination. I replied with a message designed to remove his illusions of safety. You're going to talk to me. The question is whether you want Mia there too. Choose wisely. This time his reply arrived almost instantly. Fine. Tomorrow. Noon. The coffee place next to campus. I didn't tell Clara where I was going the next day. She watched me leave with a look that blended dread and fragile hope, perhaps imagining I might be on my way to forgive her, to find a path forward, to salvage something from the ruins. She didn't realize that forgiveness was the one outcome I had removed from the table entirely. When I walked into the cafe at noon, Evan was already there. He sat in the corner, hunched over a cup he wasn't drinking, pale enough to pass for someone recovering from illness. His leg bounced beneath the table with restless panic, and when he finally lifted his head to meet my eyes, the fear in his expression told me he had spent the entire night imagining everything that could go wrong. I sat across from him without saying a word. He kept swallowing hard, his fingers twitching around the cup. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he began, his voice wavering. I didn't want to hurt anyone, especially Mia. Hearing her name from his mouth almost pushed me past my restraint, but I kept my expression calm, almost clinical. You hurt everyone, I said quietly. And you're not done yet. He flinched, but he didn't deny it. His eyes darted toward the exit, calculating escape routes, but he understood the truth the moment it formed in his mind. There was nowhere to go that wouldn't follow him back. I know Clara told you, he said. I couldn't carry it anymore. I told her we needed to confess, but she was terrified of losing everything. You already took everything, I replied. He shook his head vigorously. It wasn't a relationship. It wasn't anything emotional. It was a mistake, and we both regretted it immediately. His words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced them alone in his room, but the unease in his voice betrayed the truth. He was terrified, not remorseful. I don't need your apology, I said, leaning forward. What I need is clarity. Tell me exactly how this happened. He swallowed again, then slowly recounted the events, how Clara had driven him home late one evening, how they had talked about frustrations, how one emotional conversation had escalated into something neither of them stopped. He claimed it was only one night, though his hesitation made me suspect otherwise. Still, the exact count didn't matter. What mattered was the betrayal, the secrecy, the consequences. When he finished, he finally asked the question he had been terrified to voice. What happens now? I looked at him long enough for discomfort to stretch itself thin across the table. What happens now, I said calmly, is that you take responsibility. Fully. You're not disappearing. You're not running. And you're not hiding behind silence while Mia suffers. You're going to face every part of this. He stared at me with wide eyes, understanding shifted into dread. You're going to tell her, I continued. Not Clara. Not me. You. Every detail. His face drained of color. I can't do that. It'll destroy her. It already destroyed her, I said. You just haven't watched the collapse yet. He shook uncontrollably, his breath shaky, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of his cowardice. He had created devastation he didn't have the courage to witness. You're going to tell her, I repeated, or I'll do it for you. And if I do, I promise the consequences for you will be much, much worse. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He understood he had no choice. When I left the cafe, the cold air outside felt sharper than usual, almost electric. The first phase of my plan had begun. Evan knew everything he had tried to avoid was closing in. Clara sensed it too. And the moment Mia learned the truth, everything would burn. Exactly as intended. Evan agreed to meet at the house the next afternoon. He didn't want to, of course, everything in him resisted walking into the ruins he had created, but fear has a way of dragging a person exactly where they least want to go. He texted me twice that morning, both messages trembling with excuses. I ignored them. This was the one moment he would not escape. Mia spent most of the day in her room, unaware of the storm gathering beneath her feet. She believed Evan's silence came from stress or confusion, not from something poisonous enough to tear a family apart. Clara remained on edge, pacing the hallway like someone awaiting a verdict she already expected to be severe. Each footstep carried dread, each breath carried guilt. When the doorbell finally rang, the entire house seemed to stop breathing. I opened the door, and Evan stood there, pale and fragile, as if the walk from the sidewalk to my doorway had taken all his strength. He looked youthful in a way that contrasted painfully with the gravity of what he had done, young enough to make mistakes, but old enough to know they carried consequences. Clara appeared behind me, clutching her arms, her expression torn between shame and terror. Mia stepped out of her room moments later, confused and hopeful. She believed Evan had come to apologize for the argument she thought they had. She believed this was the beginning of reconciliation. She had no idea. I gestured toward the living room. We're doing this here. All of us. Evan attempted to speak, but I stopped him with a single motion. You will not start with excuses, I said. You will start with the truth. Mia frowned, looking back and forth between us. Dad, what's going on? I didn't answer. This moment wasn't mine to narrate. It belonged to the boy who had taken advantage of her trust, her love, and her entire future. I pointed to the sofa. Sit. Evan obeyed, his legs shaking as he lowered himself. Clara hovered near the wall, visibly collapsing inside herself. Mia stood near me, gripping my sleeve, growing more worried with each second of silence. I took a seat across from Evan and waited. He tried to speak, lost his breath, then tried again. Mia, I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt you more than anything I've ever done, he said, his voice trembling so violently it barely sounded like speech. I made a terrible mistake, and I wish I could undo it, but I can't. She stared at him, bewildered. Just say it. His eyes filled with tears he didn't deserve. I wasn't honest with you. I wasn't honest with your family. He swallowed, forcing the words out. I slept with someone else. Her face drained of color. Who? Evan looked at the floor. His silence became an answer she couldn't interpret yet. Who? She repeated, louder, desperate, terrified. Clara stepped back as if struck by invisible force. She covered her mouth, releasing a quiet sound that neither belonged to confession nor denial, just raw, unfiltered agony. Mia's eyes widened with realization. No, she whispered, her voice shaking. No, please, no. Evan whispered the words like someone admitting to murder. It happened with your mother. The moment those words filled the air, everything inside the house fractured. Mia stumbled backward, grabbing onto the wall as if she needed something solid to keep from collapsing. A sound escaped her, something between a sob and a gasp, something that didn't belong to a person but to a wound. Her entire world imploded. Clara tried to speak or reach out, but I raised my hand sharply, and she froze in place. Don't touch her, I said. Don't speak to her. Not now. Mia broke, not in a dramatic way, not with screams or shattering glass, but with a slow, horrifying collapse that comes from realizing someone you love wasn't just unfaithful, but unthinkably disloyal. You betrayed me, she whispered toward Clara, her voice cracking. You betrayed your own daughter. Evan looked at her with desperate regret, but he couldn't take back a single thing. His confession was permanent. Irreversible. Clara sank to her knees, sobbing with a grief she had earned, yet still she reached out toward Mia, who recoiled as if scorched. Don't come near me, she cried. Don't even say my name. I stepped between them, keeping Clara on one side of the living room and Mia on the other. The destruction was complete. The moment Mia learned the truth, everything they tried to hide crashed into daylight. But I wasn't finished. I looked at Evan. Now tell her the rest. He closed his eyes, as if hoping that darkness might absorb responsibility. When he opened them again, he said the words with a softness that only made them more harmful. She's pregnant. Mia covered her mouth, stumbling again, tears pouring without restraint. She stared at her mother with a despair so deep it could have swallowed the entire room. You're having his baby, she whispered. Clara sobbed harder, unable to form a coherent apology. Her guilt could barely survive its own weight. Mia turned to me. Dad, please tell me this isn't real. I placed my hands gently on her shoulders. I'm here, I said. And I'm not leaving. She collapsed into me, sobbing into my chest while I stood between her and the two people who had destroyed her innocence. She cried until her voice broke, until her body trembled, until there was nothing left in her except exhaustion and disbelief. Only then did I speak again. Listen carefully, I said. Because this is what happens next. Both Clara and Evan looked up, bracing themselves. Clara, I want you out of this house today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. You will not speak to Mia until she decides she's ready, which may be never. You will not approach me except through a lawyer. Her face twisted in anguish, but she didn't protest. She knew she had no right to. And Evan, I continued. You will take responsibility for the pregnancy. You will face your parents, your education, your future, everything, without hiding behind texts or excuses. And if you fail to show up for any part of this, I will ensure the consequences follow you everywhere you go. You will not escape this. He nodded with a hollow expression, understanding he had shattered his own life, and mine, and Mia's, and Clara's. And as for me, I said, turning toward my daughter, holding her carefully as she trembled, I will rebuild what's left of this family with the one person who didn't destroy it. Mia reached for my hand, gripping it with the urgency of someone drowning. That moment became the final line separating our old life from the new one. Clara packed her bags with shaking hands and left the house before sunset. Evan walked out moments later, looking like he had aged a decade in a single day. They both stepped into consequences they had created together, consequences they would carry for years. Mia remained with me, fragile yet resilient, wounded yet determined. And I stayed beside her, not because I saw myself as a hero, but because I refused to let her believe she was alone in the aftermath of another person's sins. The family I thought I had died that day. But the father I became afterward was stronger, sharper, more present than ever before. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't end a life. Sometimes it rebuilds one.